fellow investors. Welcome to another episode of Ritter On Real Estate. We teach you how to passively invest like a pro. Today, my guest is Dave Holman, and Dave's been a real estate investor since 2011. He's a broker with Remax Riverside, and he specializes in commercial and investment property. He also co-owns 94 rental units in Southern Maine, and he enjoys working with owners, residents, and contractors to solve problems and improve communities. And one way that he does that, which we're really going to focus on today, is around energy conservation. So really excited to learn more about this myself and how you can help us as investors and owners save some dollars and also improve the environment. So Dave, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah. So before we dig in, tell us a little bit more about who you are and where you came from, and maybe how energy conservation led you to real estate, or real estate led you to energy conservation, and how this all came about.
Sure thing. Yeah, born in Portland, Maine, grew up in Maine, then traveled out to Minnesota for college and spent the next 4 years after that down in Bolivia in South America, starting a chain of camping stores and bookstores. So kind of odd background, but while I was at college, I learned a lot about energy conservation. My major was environment and technology studies. So started learning about architecture, the built environment, and how that really matters. 40% of global emissions are linked to real estate, whether it's building new buildings or operation of existing ones. That's the biggest chunk of any, factor component to climate change, essentially. So that got my wheels turning, but I didn't do anything with it until much later. I after starting this chain of stores, I came back to the US, got my MBA, and started working in nonprofit leadership, fundraising, that kind of thing. And now I'm fundraising for real estate. I started investing, when a friend of mine became a syndicator, and I had no idea what it was all about, but learned about it through him and through, being a passive investor. And it really excited me. It's like, wow, they can, pool people's money, generate a profit with it, and create these amazing buildings that are very healthy to live in. They're very low energy to operate. They're just going to be great places to live for probably hundreds of years in the future. And I think that's a really, impactful thing to do. So started buying, little buildings with friends and family as investors, and then kind of worked my way up to syndication of larger existing historic buildings here in Maine. And we're now doing our first new construction project of a 57-unit building.
Oh, very cool. So you've done a lot, kind of a different mix of things. And so let's talk about it maybe from a couple of different viewpoints, right? So energy conservation, I think it means something very different in a pre-existing building and what you're able to accomplish versus that new build. So maybe we split that up and we kind of say, okay, if you've got this building, right? You've made this investment, it's already there. There's opportunities to conserve energy and save on utilities and also help the environment. So how do you go about, what are some of the things that you do? How do you approach that problem?
Yeah. I kind of define it as like the old buildings are fixing other people's mistakes, and the new buildings are where you get to make your own mistakes. But, especially in the Northeast with existing buildings, they were not all designed, with energy efficiency in mind, and they were designed with totally different energy systems. You go down in the basements, you'll find like a coal chutes and places where the coal furnaces were kept and so forth. Then we went to oil, and that's where a lot of Maine is still unfortunately at. A lot of the oil burners have been converted to gas, and now people are abandoning both of those and going to heat pumps. And that's kind of the first technological tip that I'll give people, is that heat pumps are pretty much always the right thing to do. I thought, I was convinced by a few mechanical engineers otherwise, and I've deeply regretted it, because they really are a better technology than any of our central furnace kind of capacities. They put control in the tenant's hands over both heating and cooling. They diversify your risk points. So if you're heating a 5 or 10 unit building with one gas furnace, and it goes down, you're screwed, and you're going to be paying for hotel rooms for people for a couple days at least until you get a team in there to put in a new one. Whereas if you have 10 heat pumps in that building and one of them goes down, you just buy your tenant a heat fan or two, keep them limping along until a week or two later you can get a new heat pump or get the current one fixed, which actually has rarely ever happened for our situation. Plus, tenants they're usually paying their own electric bill. So in a lot of cases, if you have a building where the landlord is paying $5,000-$10,000 a year for heating, you go and install this amenity for tenants, which is a heat pump. You link it to each of their electric meters, and voila, you've just taken out 5 or 10 grand of your expenses, which could be 100 or 200 grand of building value that you've just added, depending on your cap rate, in the area. So it's a hugely impactful thing to be able to lower your expenses. Heat pumps are far more efficient than even natural gas, just in terms of energy in, energy out, better for the environment. They have the potential to be totally carbon neutral if you're using solar, generate the electricity the heat pumps use. That's pretty rare to see. But, as the grid over the next decades gets greener and greener, those heat pumps are going to get greener and greener as well, as they get better sources of power. So that's one great way.
Gotcha. So just starting, just to sum up, so just starting with kind of the system for heating the property, right? And there's multiple. It's got the force fed, typical old furnace. And your recommendation is go for a heat pump product instead.
Exactly. If you can get those financed either through a construction loan, sometimes the installation companies will offer financing. I've done that numerous times and it's great. I mean, you really are, the ROI on doing that is usually like 100% or more per year, and it's permanent. It's a permanent thing to do. So yes, it's a high upfront cost, but there's a federal, tax credit. There's state incentive programs and rebates. There's a lot of different programs out there that can assist you, with energy efficiency upgrades like this. And they, in the era of COVID, they have, filters in them and they're cleaning the air, as they're operating. So they're great for people with allergies and so forth.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, very cool. Okay. So that's kind of the heating element of the property. That's one way to go about it. And what else were you going to mention?
Yep. So another great way that is the least sexy thing ever is just insulation. If you're a landlord who is kind of stuck paying any heating bills at all, you probably want to think about insulation, and that's going to be your best kind of bang for your buck investment. And a lot of times in the Northeast, I see, heating fins in basements to keep the pipes from freezing because the basement is so poorly insulated, and there's, you can see daylight through the foundations in different places or by the windows. And all you have to do is get the structural element repaired, get a spray foam company to come and do at least down to the frost line, if not the entire wall. And that basement will stay 55 degrees, even in the coldest of times, if it's well sealed. You don't have to be heating it. You can lose your oil burner or gas burner furnace, which was kicking off waste heat that just heated the basement and kept the pipes from freezing, de facto. And if you insulate it, you're done. You don't need to heat that basement anymore. You save thousands of dollars a year. Again, the ROI, is usually in the 50 to 100% range or more. So it's a really good thing. Same with attics. If you're losing a lot of heat through the cap of the building, putting in cellulose or another material up in the attic, and just doing basic air sealing, in those two places is really key.
And is there a year of construction where we really see maybe practices change, where you say, okay, after this year, installation pretty good. Before this, it was pretty bad. I mean, is there kind of a time where that became more common practice?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, certainly the last 60 or 70 years where we've seen fiberglass insulation, come into common use. But it's actually pretty rare to find buildings that don't have at least a gesture at that, because it's a very easy retrofit. Any homeowner can just go to their local hardware store, buy a couple rolls, fiberglass, and roll them out up in an attic. It's not a very technical exercise, but the key is that they're often not air sealed. So there'll be penetrations in that attic all over the place. And insulation doesn't do a lot of good if you got air blowing up, hot
Mhm.
air coming up into your attic. So air sealing it is really a key part as well. And yeah, generally anything after the 80s, you're probably going to have a pretty decent R value, which is the insulation value in your
Mhm.
roof, walls, and so forth. Pre, 80s, 90s, you're rolling the dice.
Sure. Sure. And so you talked about kind of like for a single family homeowner, you roll a few rolls of insulation out. What about it, like from a larger scale on like 100 unit apartment building? Let's say like what would be a solution there to come in and retrofit?
Yeah, it's usually the same materials. Spray foam and blown in cellulose are probably going to be the two best, sort of tools in your toolkit. Spray
Mhm.
foam has a really high, R value per inch. It also air seals by itself, which is great. And it's very good for very limited spaces where if you need to, do the sheathing on the top side of the roof or something like that, but it's a little more expensive. There's off gassing of chemicals, which can impact occupancy when that happens. Um, Cellulose is very cheap, very environmentally friendly, very benign. It's basically just newspaper and boric acid. And it does a great job of insulation, but you need a deck to be able to blow it into,
Mhm. It just
18 to
sits on
24
top. Yeah.
inches. Yep. Yep. And you need to air seal, before that and kind of prep it. But there's a lot of companies that'll do that. I have DIY'd it. It's very messy. I wouldn't do it again. I'm not great at it, but it's totally doable. You go to, Lowe's, Home Depot, rent the machine for a day, and you can save a couple $1,000.
Gotcha. Very cool. And can you talk a little bit about, you mentioned some government incentives, maybe some grants or tax credits, different things. I mean, what kind of programs can folks tap into as an incentive to do some of this work?
Yeah, great question. With insulation, I don't know of any federal programs. It's pretty much all like state and regional. In the Northeast, we have RGGI, the Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and then that gives money to each state that gets parceled out. So in Maine, we have Efficiency Maine, which has a lot of incentives for insulation, where you can get like a third to half of your project or more paid for, by these incentives. So it's like applying for scholarships to college. Like you can look around and you may find very good programs in your area that are run through different either nonprofit organizations or governments, local or state.
Gotcha. Really interesting stuff. Um, what about from like you mentioned solar power at the beginning, and I don't know how fluent you are on solar power, but I'm just curious about solar as an application to save energy, like on an apartment building.
Yeah, with all this stuff, I know enough to be dangerous, but I'm not an
Gotcha.
expert. So I've installed solar in several of our buildings. It's not the lowest hanging fruit. It's something
Mhm.
to do in a building where the landlord is going to be stuck with a very significant electrical bill, or you can pass the savings of solar, on to tenants, and they're going to be sort of paying you back for doing it, essentially. And there's great ways to do that, but solar has come down tremendously in price. There's still a 26% federal tax credit, for solar. So if you have, W-2 type of income or income that, can be offset with tax credits, that's a great way, to get a big discount on your solar installations. And, it's a really great technology. I think it looks good on a roof. And they last a long, long time. I mean, the solar panels that were installed in the 70s and 80s are still making power today. So, the ones I've been installing are warranted, I think, for 25 or 30 years, which tells you a lot about what they expect, to happen there. And they're, certified against 125-mile-an-hour winds and hail and so forth. They're supposed to be, pretty bulletproof, and they're covered by all the insurance, homeowners insurances that you would have. So they're a great technology, and you can do the battery backups. And with our new construction, we're actually looking into that. And this gets, a little technical, but you can become what's called a virtual power plant, where you, by having a large battery backup, can actually get paid by the grid, by energy companies, to regulate demand. And
Mhm.
so if all of our, apartment buildings, heat pumps and water heaters and so forth are connected, to our own little, smart grid, let's call it, we can throttle those up and down, or a company working with us can, and we can basically get paid to not use as much AC during peak times, and turn the unit off for 5 minutes at a time and then turn it back on. Doesn't affect resident comfort, doesn't, really impact the temperature in the unit, but it just helps utility companies manage their peak loads. And it helps buildings, do more of their heating and, in times when the energy is cheap, heating of water, stuff like that. It doesn't have to be at a given time necessarily. So I think there's really exciting things happening, with building energy and building technology that are just in the very early stages of getting implemented. But when they're implemented, it's going to be really huge, and it helps diversify, the electric grid and the way that power is distributed.
Yeah, really cool. And I definitely will dig into that. Is there anything on the already built side, any other tips or things you would tell folks to focus on?
Yeah. I would watch out for windows. If they're old wooden windows that could have lead in them, I always replace those with vinyl. But if you already have vinyl windows, the return on investment in going for like a Pella or an Anderson model in a rental unit, unless you're really class A kind of high end, is not there. So even though you would think that a leaky window or a 10-year-old window is something you should replace, most times you're going to get much better bang for your buck through insulation, through heat pumps, basic air sealing, stuff like that.
Gotcha. And how about water conservation? Low flow toilets, low flow shower heads, things like that. Any comments on the water side of things?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I have literally flushed money down the toilet. I mean, not dollar bills, but when toilets run, man, your water bill goes through the roof. You really need to get on top of those quickly.
I can attest
water
to
conservation. That. Yeah. We may all have been there. And there's no mercy. I mean, that sewer department is not going to like cut you slack because you didn't know.
Yeah.
So, anytime you find the old 3 or 5 gallon toilets, get them out of there. Put in the low flow 1.28 gallons. I like the dual flush, where you can do even less for, pee and more for number 2. Tenants, residents like it a lot. It's a nice kind of feel good amenity. Aerators on faucets. Again, it's not a sexy thing, but like that will save you real money over time. And it's a huge ROI on just making sure that your shower heads are low flow, aerators on faucets, low flow toilets, just checking on all the appliances in your units that use water and making sure they're just checking those basic boxes, but it all adds up over time. And if you can take, a big building water bill from 10 grand a month to 5 or 2, that's real money in your and investors' pockets.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And some of those things are shower heads, aerators. Those are simple. I mean, those don't cost hardly anything to go and put in, right? Have you ever run into issues though with, I mean, I guess I've heard stories of lack of pressure, and people having, their drain lines back up and things like that because you lower that flow too little. Have you ever run into anything like that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there was some bad technology out there like 10 and 20 years ago, like the first kind of era of low flow toilets. But now, I mean, those things could flush a squirrel. I mean, they are really powerful. So, they're much better. They have better pressure than the things they're replacing. The old 3 and 5 gallon toilets, those, they just waste water and they don't flush as effectively. So, watch your brands. I always kind of defer to plumbers, and if the plumber wants to use Moan or Standard or whatever, from Home Depot or Lowe's and not this or that, I mean, I would defer to them, whatever they're going to be doing fewer repair calls on, not fixing flappers constantly and so forth. I would go with those units.
Very good. And if you ever need to flush a squirrel, call Dave. He's got a toilet for you.
Yeah. Give you the product specs on that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you digging in there a little with us because I mean, I think these simple money saving things are great for any investor, no matter the size of the property. And even, some people will say, well, we're doing a RUB system, we're charging utilities back to the residents anyway. But I think still an aspect of affordability, right? If you can show that, by living at your property versus another property, their utility bill is going to be significantly cheaper, right? That's an incentive. And there's just the positive impact on the environment overall, right? And as we think about like ESG investing, and as a buzzword as this is now, the environment, the social, and the government or governance, the environmental piece is big, and people are really starting to care more and more about that as well.
Yeah, the beauty is that you can do well by doing good in real estate. You can do the right thing and it will earn you more money. And that's, I think true in the larger business context. As a former management consultant, I'm sure you identify with just efficiency. Like, we need to be more efficient and you'll do better.
Love efficiencies.
Very direct correlation with profit, and that, efficiency with resources is what it's all about. So it's not it doesn't need to be ethical or philosophical. It can be very kind of hard-nosed business reasons for doing the right thing. Plus, these things are all amenities, nicer shower heads, nicer faucets, heat pumps. Like, these are amenities that residents want and they appreciate. So it's not as though it's a window dressing or something that, gets lost in the RUB system. But you certainly, you have a very different incentive. Again, if they're paying the utility or you are, I mean, that will change the speed and the quality with which you might do things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, no, I mean, it's great perspective though. And yeah, it's very good. So I want to switch over. I want to talk about some of the new stuff though, because you said you're doing some new development and you're obviously thinking about some pretty cutting edge things. So I want to hear about some of that.
Yeah, I've been learning a lot. My partner, Jason Lord, has done over 12 syndications of new construction. He's an expert. He's an architect as well as a developer. So I'm lucky to be, the rookie playing with the veteran here. But some of the things, that I've learned about in that are just like going for larger window sizes and getting natural light into units is a huge amenity, huge plus, good for energy efficiency as well. I mean, windows aren't as good of an insulation as a wall, but in terms of quality of life, that's huge. And that translates to rent, to occupancy, and the things that really matter, in new construction. Looking at the total energy profile of the building can sometimes let you violate code. So you can have maybe less R value in your wall as long as your building is performing at a certain level if you're doing an energy model on that building. And a lot of developers don't think about that or don't do it. They just kind of mindlessly follow all the rules. And it doesn't mean that your building is more efficient, because last time I checked, heat rises. It doesn't explode out the side of walls. So generally, if you're over insulating your cap, in the top of your building, and you're making sure there's no air penetrations, that will give you a really good performance. And you can use something like the passive house standards, or the living building standards, which are both like very aggressive, very impressive, guidelines and standards basically to construct on. It's a little hard for like market rate, housing where every penny and dollar really matters. It's ironically almost easier for low income housing and for subsidized projects to pursue and achieve, LEED certification, passive house, and those sort of certifications, because in the market rate, we can do the same things they are doing, but to get the certification, you need to pay engineers 80 grand, and you need to pay your architect an extra 80 grand, and 160 grand in a 50 or 100 unit project. That's real money. That starts to add up. And all it really is marketing. And I'm a tree hugging environmentalist saying that, the thing that matters is not the certification. It's doing what the certification wants you to do. For the impact it'll have. Because if that building can have a better NOI over the course of its operating life, I mean, that's a huge, huge deal on the appraisal. If you can demonstrate, better operating margins in a building, that's a really big deal.
Right. So some of the same, obviously insulation, low-hanging fruit. We've heard that on both sides of the fence. So we focus on insulation. Window sizes, which is, I think, interesting. I mean, one, just aesthetically, people want big windows. They want to be able to have, have that experience and feel like you're outside, right? But also bringing light in allows you to do less electricity. What else are you guys thinking about as you look at new developments?
Yeah, I'm on a anti-carpet mission, and I want everyone listening to rip all their carpets out and get rid of them. No, I mean, that's actually pretty wasteful. So use them until they're fully depreciated, shall we say, stained and ready to
Yep.
go. But if you're doing new construction, for heaven's sakes, don't install carpet. It is usually full of chemicals that are off-gassing, creating VOCs and other toxic compounds. It's only going to last you a year or 5 years at most before it looks really bad.
Yeah, I don't know any
And then you
carpet
have
that
to
lasts
replace it.
5 years in a rental.
It,
I mean,
it
we're going through it every
absorbs.
year or two.
Oh yeah, it absorbs odors and allergens and dust. And it's if tenants want to put in their own throw rugs and so forth in their bedrooms, I mean, absolutely knock yourself out. But as a landlord, you want something hard on the surface, which means wood, bamboo, tile, luxury vinyl plank, tile. Those are all acceptable, good materials to use depending on the kind of units you're trying to create. So go with something that's going to last in your flooring, because the price is not that different, but the operating efficiency of something hard really matters. And
Absolutely.
carpet is just, yeah.
Absolutely. And I completely agree with you. And a good friend of mine actually owns a flooring company. And we were just talking about this because he's a huge proponent of hard flooring in apartments as well. The pushback that you inevitably always get, though, is, if somebody's above you and it's a hard surface you're walking on, you're going to hear the footprints and all these things. But I know, even from just talking to my friend, that, I mean, that's something that's changed a lot in the past couple of years too, of just the materials you can put between the flooring, and to be able to mute that, whether it's cork or other substances. But I know that's gotten a lot better.
Exactly. In old buildings, where the people who'd complain about this live. Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing but plywood and, framing between you guys.
Yeah.
In new buildings, you must design them to be, insulated with sound. And your architects, or even in bigger projects, like specific sound engineers are going to be doing that. And so, no, you shouldn't hear people walking. I mean, if they're having a, big fight or playing loud music or whatever, you might hear something, but new buildings should not be transferring that low level of noise through the floors.
Yeah. And just very practically, I mean, the life of like an LVT versus carpet, I mean, it's 5-7x, what carpet is, and really saves you a lot of time on turns, time and cost on turns. And that it's not only the cost, but it's the downtime and the lost revenue that matters when you're turning over units. So the faster you can do it, the better you're going to be.
Totally. I think your flooring friend could speak to this better than I, but when it comes to LVT, which is a very popular material, I'm seeing a lot of it. Don't buy the cheapest ones, because it's bad. You don't want that. It feels kind of papery almost when you're walking on it. You want the ones that either have an underlayment or you get a nice underlayment for it. They're only $2 or $3 a foot. It's not that different from the ones that are like 150 or 126, but they have a lot more millimeters of actual plank, so they can take cleaning and rubbing and traffic and still show their grain and so forth for a long time. So the quality really matters. And for heaven's sakes, don't use laminate, because it's not waterproof. And so anytime you're getting spills or stuff on it, it's going to be degrading pretty quickly.
Yeah, those are fantastic tips. Well, this is super interesting. Anything else from the world that we should be exploring as real estate owners?
Yeah, I think in the COVID world, if you're designing big multifamily, you need to think about the plague. You need to think about air filtration, and that's a real marketing element right now. And all the people that are young during COVID, they're going to pay attention to which building has HEPA filtration or those kind of things. So I think thinking about your air in a building has taken on increased importance, whether it's retrofitting existing buildings or new construction. And I think that's really key to look at, and we're thinking about,
Yeah.
doing HRV systems for retrofits now, where we're getting cold air coming in, exchanging the heat out of it, so it's not as much of a loss, and getting fresh air into buildings is a really important feature.
Gotcha. And so are you looking at like with a heat pump system actually having like individual heating and cooling for each unit versus a shared ducted system? Is that the way to go?
It all depends. Ducting is kind of a controversial topic. Like, I personally kind of hate it. And I would rather just have the head of the heat pump blowing out the air into the unit and just tell people to leave their doors open. But ducting can look really nice if you do it right. Or it can be concealed, in walls and stuff, but it can also carry in dust. I mean, it depends on what, air it's using. You don't want to be recirculating air, with your ductwork if you can avoid that. So I prefer the point of source, heaters, where the heat pump is blowing out the heat, but you can use VTAC units, in large multifamily with ductwork. We're designing that in our multifamily building. So I think there's more than one way to, skin the cat in that regard. And it just depends on what's the right fit for the building and for the market. If tenants are really expecting ductwork in the South where cooling is really key versus in the North where it's not, as important, that all depends.
Absolutely. No, great point. Well, awesome, Dave. This has been very informational. I've learned a ton, and I think some things I can take back to my own projects. Before I let you get going, I want to take you through our keys to success round. There's 4 questions I want to ask you. The first one is, and you've been in these shoes as a passive investor and investing with your friend, it sounds like. So if you were going to make an investment with a deal sponsor, with a syndicator, you can only ask one question. What is that one question?
What really motivates you in life? And if the answer has anything to do with money, I would probably walk away from that syndicator. Because to me, I want people who are doing this for other reasons. Like, they love the architecture, they love the community, they love the building process. And that you're investing in a person. You're not investing in the building. You're investing in the leadership team of the syndication group. And you want those people to be good people who are going to be honest and hardworking and so forth. And I feel like if they're just in it for the money and it's purely a business proposition and situation, there's more propensity for things to go wrong because your interests aren't quite as aligned as you might think they are in that case.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. What are you most proud of in your career?
Giving refugees to this country their first homes, their first starts. To me, that's the American dream. It's coming here with nothing, and getting a place to live, getting jobs, working your butt off and paying your rent. There's nothing cooler to me than seeing new Americans or people who are homeless get their lives together in my units because we were willing to give them a chance.
Oh, that's awesome. What's a book that everybody should read?
Investment Biker by Jim Rogers is not your typical rich dad, poor dad recommendation. But it's a great book. He was George Soros's investment partner, and then he just took like a year and a half off to go, motorcycling with his girlfriend through like Eurasia, like all across Soviet Union, down through Africa. Just incredible stories, but all linked with business and investing kind of wisdom. Really entertaining, great read.
Oh, awesome. I'll have to check that out. And lastly, what is your number one key to success?
I think it's honesty and just trying to do the right thing. If I find myself getting tempted by the shiny object or money or something like that, more than just kind of putting in the hard work to do things right, I often am led astray. So that would be it. Just trying to be true to yourself, be honest to your investors, to your team, and don't pretend you have all the answers.
Yeah, I think it's critical to success, and can be difficult sometimes, especially when you have investors, right? To admit that you don't have all the answers.
Yeah, you want to come off like a know-it-all, you know? But actually, like, these investors, they'll spot a phony a mile away, you know. And
Mhm.
so if you try to pretend you know more than you do, you have more experience than you do, you know, those kind of things, they would rather invest in someone who's genuine about being a beginner than they would in someone who's kind of inauthentic, even though they have more experience.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice, and I think it's a great place to wrap up. Dave, thank you so much for coming on the show. If folks want to get in touch with you or want to learn more about what you're doing, how can they reach you?
Yeah, they should give me a call, you know, on my personal cell phone, 207-517-5700. They can email me at dave@holmanhomes.com, and our website is holmanhomes.com. So would love to talk to anyone who's interested in passive investing, and wish your viewers and listeners a great day.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dave, and you have a great day as well. And thank you for coming on the show.
All right, thanks a lot.